What's a family secret you didn't get told until you were older that made things finally make sense? My dad never called his stepmom anything but her real name, Margaret. He has 7 brothers and sisters and they all called her mom or some form of that. When I got older it turns out my grandpa was actually cheating on my real grandma, my dad's mom, with Margaret while she was dying for colon cancer. My dad was 5 when she dies, and as she was dying my dad had to call my grandpa to tell him to come home because she was dying. After that Margaret and her 3 kids moved in and my dad was forced to live with his sister who was 18 and married. This was late 70s backcountry, so not abnormal for the time. From then until he turned 16 when he decided to move in with his best friend and his mom. So I learned that he probably has always had resentment towards Margaret because of everything that happened when he was so young and never wanted to call her anything that resembled a mother because that's not what she was to him. Not as crazy for me, but I don't call my stepmom anything but her name, Tammy. My mom committed suicide in April 2015 while my dad was engaged to my stepmom. They got married in July of that year. I know it's not her fault, but she doesn't feel like a mom to me. It doesn't help that she can be really mean for no reason and I just don't like her personality. Not all that extreme, but it was emotional for me. My grandfather was the typical tough, rugged mountain man. He never expressed emotion and in fact rarely ever even spoke at family gatherings. He would just sit in the corner drinking beer. I never felt that he and I had a very good relationship. Considering I was the weird, artsy kid in the family, we didn't have much to talk about because we couldn't relate to each other well. He died of lung cancer 2 years ago. A couple of months after he died I was visiting my parents and my mom pulled out a shoebox that belonged to him filled with sentimental photographs that he kept hidden in his closet. Nobody knew about it until after he died and they were cleaning his things out. Almost every single photograph was of me. It broke my heart. I wish I would have been closer to him. He clearly loved me a lot more than I thought he did. That my aunt's close friend that she lives with is actually her girlfriend was about 22 when they told me. Never even thought about it until it was said. Weird how I was completely oblivious to this for so many years. That my sister, she was 16 when I was born and kicked out, is my mother. Her mother, my grandma, raised me as her daughter. It doesn't end there. I was a product of abuse from a family friend. To this day I don't know who my real dad is. My grandma was in her 40s when she had me, and my sister was sent to a boarding school when she was pregnant with me. My sister has no idea that I know. Wait, so they kicked their daughter out when they realized she was being abused by family friend. Something felt strange about my grandfather's funeral, just the way they were emphasizing his place in heaven. Later found out that he shot himself in the heart with a 357. Same side of the family also had seemingly random people show up at family gatherings throughout my life that ended up being illegitimate children of my grandma. I just started gaining uncles and cousins. Confused the crap out of me as a child. Grandpa is a pedo with a track record in my family. That's why I never got left alone with him. Unfortunately my cousins did. The expected happened, and then the unexpected. After 40 some years he finally got reported and is now rotting in a county jail. Similar story except he never got reported. My family seemed to forgive him, and he died of prostate cancer a few years ago. I might have been the only person not crying at his funeral. My sister and I both got UTIs at the same time when our family was staying at our grandparents' house. One day my grandma took both of us aside and started what felt like an interrogation about whether any adults had touched us. Like, if something happened, you have to tell me right now. At the time, I felt gross, confused, and guilty, even though nothing had happened. It was just too intense. I later learned that my grandma had been sexually abused by her brother for years and her mother refused to believe her. Good for her for looking out for you though. When I was around 6-8 years old, my uncle passed away. I thought it was something sudden and medically tragic, as I remember him having lung problems of some sort. When I got older I found out he committed suicide because his girlfriend broke up with him. I remember visiting my dad and hanging out in my uncle's room where we got to play video games and listen to cool music with him. That was the start of me learning about mental illness running in the family and connected a lot of dots for me. The girlfriend breaking up was probably the tip of the iceberg. Chances are issues had brewed for a long time. Was told my aunt and uncle died because of a carbon monoxide leak in their house. When I was 16 I was told the truth. My uncle was having serious money problems. He shot my aunt and then hung himself. That my grandmother's husband was a pedophile. All of a sudden I knew why my uncle was so weird and would pick me up and carry me away rather than let me stay alone in a room with him. For the longest time I thought my uncle was a real prude. My male cousins could all swim naked or run around in just their swim trunks. But my uncle made me always wear a swimsuit and put on a cover-up when I came out of the pool. He later admitted if God forbid he touched you, I was making sure no one could try to blame you. They blamed all his other victims for being too tempting. My uncle, bless his heart, wanted to kill that man so bad. For that matter so did my dad. Finding out the pedo was, well, a pedo, made all of their muttering to each other at family gatherings make so much more sense. Your uncle sounds like a really caring person. One of my most beloved mom's recipes was actually Hamburger Helper. She was a from scratch cook and literally everything else we ate she made herself. She never told us because it made her so mad that her kids would love a boxed meal so much. She did it once out of sheer desperation because she didn't have time to cook one night. We ended up loving it. I only found out in college because I begged for the recipe. I love giving her crap for it to this day. My late father was a great dad. Went to work, came home every night and nothing was really out of the ordinary except that he would ask my sisters and I to let him use the money from our piggy banks. My granddad lived with us and he had a great pension and relatively no bills. So he spoiled us rotten and would always give us money because he knew we had it, but told us not to tell anyone and that he'd give it back. He would also really only have two moods, really cranky or extremely sweet. My sisters and I called it his nice face. This was all we knew until I was about in 8th grade. We went to a private school and my dad would tell us school was cancelled. There was a gas leak, institute days etc and we would stay home. When we would go back to school, nobody else would know what we meant as they had been in school. One day, just before my graduation, my mom let out a scream and started screaming. Our house was being foreclosed on and my dad hadn't been paying the mortgage and had been trying to cover up for the fact that he had been a functional C addict. The nice face was when he was high. The school absences were because he'd spent tuition money on drugs and then had to pay before my mom caught wind. Apparently, it had gotten worse by this time but he'd been an addict for more than 20 years and none of us knew. Addiction as a B. Sorry this happened. My grandma and grandpa have been separated since we were all young kids. My grandpa would always fall asleep on the couch before we went to bed on holidays and when we'd wake up in the morning, he was out getting coffee. We never thought anything of it because they were still always together. However, looking back, I don't remember them ever being in the same room or ever really interacting beyond the age of about 5. They're very Catholic and don't believe in divorce, yet they both have new significant others who are pushing them for marriage. Holidays are very weird now. My pet rabbit got attacked by something a couple years after I got it. My parents found it dead and replaced it before I found out. I just thought my rabbit lived super long but it was actually 2 rabbits. This happened over 10 years ago and I found out last year. Dad and his brother hate each other. His dad, my grandfather, was dying. He needed a kidney. Dad was a match and didn't donate. Once he passed crap kicked off for real. I always thought it was due to my dad not giving the kidney. My dad drank drinks a lot. It would affect him greatly to give up a kidney. There were many accusations about his drinking and being selfish. After the funeral we were asked to come take a lot of his belongings and his brother showed up and made a big scene. I broke it up and went to talk to my uncle. I was like WTF and didn't make progress. Keep in mind that I'm like 30 plus in the middle of this. Last year it all became 100% clear. My uncle likes to play the victim but was piece of crap trying to cover his butt. My uncle has been married 6 times. He lied to his wife about how many marriages he had. He is a serial cheater. During the numerous hospital stays of my grandfather my uncle would travel to be with his dad but in reality he was out freaking everything that moved, namely a nurse looking after my grandfather. At this time he is married to wife 6. She thinks she is 3rd and has his first child who is about 10. Uncle had always been this guy, but it blew up when my dad was hanging out with his bro and his brother's business partner. Dad got drunk and laid all his brother's dirty laundry out to the business partner. All of it, every detail. The business partner jokingly made comments about it in proximity of the current wife. This obviously caused tension. Tension that eventually had the partners separate. Uncle went nuclear on dad about it. Dad told him 1. If he was that upset about it, why does he keep doing it, and 2. Back the frick off unless he wants him to lay all his crap out to the current wife. So all this time, all this hate due to uncle trying to keep his secret and masking it as my dad being a piece of crap alcoholic or wanting to stop drinking and save his dad's life. That my grandparents didn't talk to each other 20 years before my grandfather finally kicked the bucket. They lived in the same house the entire time too, and no one knows why they weren't on speaking terms. There is a video about an old Japanese couple who didn't speak to each other for I think a similar amount of time. I believe it turned out that it had been going on so long they were essentially too embarrassed to talk to each other. I didn't know one of my cousins existed until I was about 10 years old. Turns out he was diagnosed with leukemia as a child and I was a very sensitive kid, so my family decided not tell me until the treatment was successful and he recovered. It would have been okay if they told me as soon as he was healthy again, but I guess they forgot, so the first time I met him, I was wondering how exactly I managed to forget the existence of a whole person. I thought that was going to end with your cousin passing away, and they just let you go on not knowing about them, but dang. They survived and just didn't mention it. That my dad was a pedophile. Had no clue, even through a decade of abuse. I was told to keep a secret by him, and my family kept the secret from me because they had thoughts of him being better or reformed. So, when I was 15 I realized it was wrong. Or, it all started to make sense. Who knew? As a child, you can't trust your own father. My grandfather abused my mother and then went on to abuse me. No one gave me the "no one is allowed to touch your body" talk. My mother literally put me in his lap. From my father's family line, my great-grandfather killed my great-grandmother with an axe while she was sleeping. My grandma, who was the oldest one, raised all of her siblings. She was 19 at the time and just married my granddad, who was 19 too. Youngest sister was just 2 years old. They were 9 in total. I knew my grandma raised all her siblings, but I always thought it was because her mother died from some illness. I just found out when I was 17 and asked my aunt. My great-great-grandmother was 8 months pregnant and milking a cow. Cow got upset and kicked her in the head, killing her and the baby. The eldest daughter of the family basically became the mom, too. And there were also so many kids ranging from I think to 17. It's crazy to think about. I can't imagine having to do that. My aunt and uncle, who passed away when I was 11, were drug addicts. I adored them, but as I got older I started seeing less and less of them and never understood why. My parents briefly told me when I was 16 and that my uncle didn't die of a brain tumor. Actually had one though, but instead he shot himself while my aunt was in the other room, which led to my aunt's drug-related death on New Year's Day. They finally told me the whole story when I was 21. I was the last person to know. Even my little brother knew before me, because I was extremely close to them and looked so highly of them. I still do. I wish I would have known sooner, but I understand why they didn't tell me. My grandmother was a hard drug addict. She was a nurse and basically Nurse Jackied her way into stealing dilaudid hydromorphone from the hospital and shooting it up for a decade or so. I still don't know the real specifics, but this was happening when I was roughly 1 to 10 years old and I was told about it when I was in my mid-20s. She was never noticeably out of it, but I remember her being super chill every time she watched us and rarely ever drove us anywhere. Now I understand that she was just stoned sideways and wasn't going to risk driving us kids around while she was under the influence. Another odd thing, when she was stoned she would always eat ice chips. She's sober now and doesn't anymore, but I remember her chomping on ice cubes all day long when we were little. Both of my parents were on dilaudid when they were in hospice and they chewed ice chips, but I assumed it was because they were too weak to easily drink beverages. My grandparents forced my aunt to get an abortion before my family moved to America, rendering her permanently sterile. It finally makes sense why none of the adults talk about having children around her. I have an uncle who is a hardcore alcoholic and lived with my grandparents until they passed. We always thought he was just a non-motivated loser. I have another uncle that passed away well before I was born, got hit by a car coming back from the store getting something for my grandparents. After both grandparents passed, my mom told me that the alcoholic uncle was asked to go to the store but bribed his little brother to go instead, which led to his death. My grandmother, who I have always held in very high regard, told my alcoholic uncle afterward that his brother would still be alive if he had gone to the store like she asked. I cannot imagine the guilt that would have laid on him and completely understand why he ended up that way as a result. In my adult life, I've found that my uncle is actually a pretty good man, just dealt a crappy hand. That my granny attempted suicide when my mom was in high school. My mom was the one that found her. Luckily she did find her, because if she hadn't she wouldn't have survived. It explains why my mom panics the way she does and jumps to conclusions all the time. If she can't get a hold of me or my brother on the phone, she automatically assumes we are dead and she panics. Recently, she couldn't get a hold of my brother for a few hours and she lost all composure and had a nervous breakdown. We just are starting to realize after all these years that she probably has undiagnosed PTSD. When I was really young, I never got why my dad wouldn't allow drinks like Kool-Aid in the house, especially if it was grape. Later in life I found out he was part of the cleanup crew for Jonestown. After reading and watching many documentaries on Jonestown, I never once thought of the cleanup crew. Now I am. And now I'm sad that a huge number of my relatives on my dad's side have killed themselves. My brother, grandfather, 4 cousins, 1 uncle, and 5 great uncles. And of those remaining, most have schizophrenia. There are usually only 1 or 2 people per generation that don't kill themselves or need medication or need to be put away. This was a big unspoken family secret. Both my mom and I had no idea until my brother killed himself. My brothers and I all share very distinctive teeth with my dad, but no one else in the family has it. After my gran died, I found some letters between her and my granddad while he was on national service. Going by the dates, granddad was in Malaya when my dad was conceived. That place he visited dad and got to eat potato chips, and one of them was like an extra big potato chip. Yeah, that was jail. And it was because he was caught drunk driving while also having a bunch of C. So I guess the don't do more than one illegal thing at a time advice he later gave me made sense. Also why we moved and then he wasn't around for a while. My brother and I are only half siblings. We didn't know that my dad isn't his dad until I was 10 and he was 15. The only reason he was told was because my mom was trying to manipulate him into choosing her side in the divorce. It should be considered abuse when parents weaponize their children to win in a divorce. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.